Start your morning with insights and drive. It's the business sit down where ideas come alive. From boardrooms to breakthroughs, we cover it all. Of FS Business School, standing tall. Sit down, tune in, let the wisdom flow. Real talk, big moves, and the knowledge to grow. On your way to work, we're paving the way. The business sit down will set ablaze.
Welcome to the Business Sit Down, brought to you by the UFS Business School. In this episode, we dive into the often overlooked world of corporate governance within the informal economy. We'll explore how informal businesses like street vendors navigate corporate governance without the formal structures of large corporations. Our expert guest, Dr Cornelie Crous, will break down these key factors that influence corporate governance ideas in this sector, including transparency, ethical practices, and the balance between flexibility and structure. Join us as we uncover the unique opportunities and hurdles informal businesses face when it comes to establishing effective governance, and how these practices shape their growth and sustainability.
Okay. Doc, tell me, corporate governance in the informal sector, how does this differ from corporate governance as we would know it in, let's say, a company, or the more formal sector of corporate governance?
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, Philip. It's an interesting question, and it's a very interesting phenomenon to talk about. I'll start with the traditional corporate governance. So traditional corporate governance stems from legislation and practices that build in businesses over years in terms of how to manage an organization or how to steer an organization. So corporate governance is very close, or traditional corporate governance is very closely related to strategy as well. The example you used of a company, if you think of a company and who is responsible for corporate governance, it would be your board of directors. If you think in the public sector, like the municipality, those individuals would typically be your council and your council members. So it's that particular individual or group of individuals that is responsible for giving the strategic direction to an organization without getting involved in the operational side. So traditional corporate governance stems from the use of legislation, the Companies Act, the PFMA, the use of formal structures to do business in, which is quite different than the informal economy. So in the informal economy, you typically do not have those formal structures. You don't have a board of directors that can give you strategic direction. It's typically you yourself, like we say, me, myself, and I have my little business. Maybe I am a street vendor. I have a little kiosk at a taxi rank, and I sell my few goods, and that's about what my business is all about. So you can't have that formal structure, or you don't have that formal structures in place, which makes it very difficult for the informal economy to apply your corporate governance principles.
What are some of the key challenges in your expertise that the informal businesses face when it comes to governance and decision making?
I think one of the biggest problems in that sense is the fact that the decision making, even if you link it to corporate governance in the informal economy, is very informal. Right. It sounds strange to repeat that, but in a formal organization, when you have governance structures in place, there's a process, there's more than likely a policy that you can use to take decisions from, you have data that you can use. In the informal economy, you take decisions on the go. So today I feel like selling mangoes, and I go ahead and I sell mangoes. Tomorrow I feel like selling apples, I take that decision on the run. So the lack of data and business information in the informal economy makes it very difficult to govern that structure. Another challenge that you have is the fact that you are, as I mentioned, you're typically on your own. You don't have very often you don't have peers that you can talk to. So when you have to take a decision, you typically feel very lonely because you don't have a soundboard. So for decision making in the informal economy, that peer relationship or that soundboard is very often not present. That assists you with governance in the informal economy. And then I think a large challenge or a huge challenge that we sit with is the lack of knowledge and the lack of education. Most of the formal economy is driven by a need to survive, and you just run it as is, and you don't necessarily have the knowledge or the skills and the education to support you to make a success of your business.
And one of the previous questions when we spoke about the difference between informal and the formal, you said that the structures differ, that you would in the informal structure not have the same structures as, for example, a formal guy. How can informal businesses implement effective governance even though they don't have the formal structures as a large corporation or large company would have?
If I can summarize corporate governance for the informal structure, and I will informal economy, and I will expand on this, is to summarize it in one or two words is ethical business. So corporate governance is all about ethical business. I think as an informal business owner or in the informal economy, where you can start with incorporating corporate governance principles is the idea of ethical business. And to realize that as a business, even an informal one, you're part of a society and you're part of a community. So when doing your business, you need to do it in an ethical way while still keeping the community and the society in mind. And that is something that's very difficult for a lot of business owners, even in the formal economy, to understand. So it falls back on the Ubuntu principle of I am because we are. So we're a community, and that's part of corporate governance. So thinking of ethical business practices is one way to go. We can also talk about what we call colloquially or in business speak the triple P concept, which is people, planet, profit. Which is central to corporate governance, to say, doesn't matter what type of business you have. It doesn't matter what type of business you do. If it's formal or informal, you don't only look at your profit bottom line. That's the traditional way of thinking of business. So if you think of corporate governance in the triple bottom line concept, is you think of the people, community, as I said, but also some formal businesses have more than one kiosk or more than one stand, so they might be employees, which is part of the people that they need to think of, and then of course your impact on the environment. So looking at environment and sustainability is also part of corporate governance.
Going on the point where we spoke about ethics a bit earlier, ethics and transparency is extremely important in corporate governance. But what is the role of ethics and transparency inside the informal sector, and how can they promote it? Especially if you think about the recent stuff or the recent news where there was certain unethical practices in some spaza shops that led to children getting sick and some of them passing away.
I'm going to take this back to, as you said, ethics. And transparency. I think one of the most important things that any business owner, formal, informal, doesn't matter, need to start with when they start thinking of corporate governance and then people, planet, profit, etc., is start with a personal code of ethics. So what do you believe is ethical business practices? For example, if I buy an apple for 2 Rand, do I sell it for 4 Rand or do I sell it for 20 Rand? Depending on my market or whatever the case may be. So a personal code of ethics is already a start in building corporate governance and ethics in business. Looking after the environment. An example would be most of your street vendors would package their goods in plastic bags, which is understandable. It's cheap, it's easy to come by, but maybe start thinking differently in terms of rather use paper packaging instead of plastic or foamulite. And then transparency is being transparent in terms of, first of all, where your goods come from. I know in the informal economy that's not always an issue. So I'm hungry, there's something to eat, I eat that. But to think about where your products come from, are they ethically sourced? Do they, for example, come? Is it legal? The goods that you buy. That's all part of transparency and ethics. And that's very important even in the informal economy as well. And especially so if you want to build trust with your customers and you want to build that trust relationship and build your business where it becomes sustainable. So it's always important in any organization.
One of the hallmarks of most of the informal businesses is the fact that flexibility is extremely important to them, because for one day you'll be selling fat cakes, the next day you're selling illegal cigarettes. How can the informal businesses balance governance and flexibility?
I think it's very easy. I think it's easier for an informal business than for a formal business to do that. Because your decision making is so fast paced and because it's very individualized and you don't have the legislative red tape to go through if you want to do something like formal businesses do, I think it's very easy to balance governance and flexibility. And it goes back again to ethics. So whether I sell a fat cake that's fresh and I look at a affordable markup on that, or whether I sell an apple, which is also fresh, with an affordable markup, the ethical principle remains the same. So for me in the informal economy, if you think of ethical business, not exploiting your customers, making sure your goods are of a good standard, that allows you that flexibility between your transparency, your business, and then of course corporate governance.
Now, corporate governance, of course, has a very big financial impact on most companies. If you look at the fees going into governing, getting the correct committees, etc., what would be the financial impact if, for example, the government decided to enforce a certain form of corporate governance on the informal sector? Would there be a large financial impact? Wouldn't there be? What would be the impact be?
The cost of implementing formalized corporate governance practices and international best practices are extremely high. That is why you will see in most countries that corporate governance principles and codes are mainly enforced on public companies because of the cost aspect. So if the government were to implement legislation or regulations in terms of governing the informal economy, my gut instinct, and this is not based on any research, okay, but my gut instinct is that the majority of the informal economy will disappear. I'm just thinking, for example, if you are a street vendor at a taxi rank that sells fruit, there's no formal legislation to comply with. The moment that you enforce legislation, there will be tax implications. So I will need to start paying tax. I will need to implement a formal financial management system to record my income and my expenses, which I need to have money for. I will immediately need to start thinking of a governing board of some sort, which is a little independent, and I will need to start remunerating them for their expertise and their time. So the moment that you include regulation or legislation into the informal economy, the cost will just be too high for those that participate in the informal economy to survive.
Now, one of the other questions I've got is, as in everything in life, there's spoken rules and unspoken rules. Now, the spoken rule in this sense would be formal governance. Do you think there's an unspoken governance structure that exists inside the informal economy? A way that they govern each other, or a way that there's a structure that manages how business is done? Or do you think it's like the wild, wild west and every man is for himself?
I don't think it's like the Wild West. Again, this is speaking from gut instinct, all right? Every society is governed in some way by either a moral code or an ethical code in terms of what is acceptable in that community or not. So whether it's cultural rules or whether it is business rules in an informal economy environment, I do think there is some type of code. It's not written, it's not formal, but I think those that actually participate in the informal economy, if I can't, for example, I can't just go to CBD, to the nearest taxi rank and open my own stand. I promise you I won't be accepted and I will very, very quickly be removed. Right? So there is some sort of code.
Yes.
And I do think they know the code. It's maybe unspoken, maybe it's implied, but I do think there is some sort of governance, although it's not formalized.
Now, for a bit of a weird question, let's say there was a theme song for the formal governance and the informal governance in the public and then private sector. What would that theme song be, in your opinion?
I think in the public sector, if you're thinking of, or if I'm thinking of the Zondo report and state capture and those types of things, I would say if corporate governance were implemented, it would have gone much different. So I think the theme song for governance in the public sector would be Bridge Over Troubled Water. So you will obviously get some guidance over all these troublesome issues. The private sector in South Africa is well known for governance principles. We are one of the international leaders in governance, if you think of the King Code. So I'm thinking with that one maybe respect from Aretha Franklin. I have a lot of respect for what happens in the public sector. In terms of the informal economy, I don't know. I haven't thought of a theme song for the informal economy. Maybe I came in like a wrecking ball. I don't know. If you implement governance,
yes,
it would be chaos. So maybe that's the way to go.
I have to say, if for the public one, I don't know, but for the private one, I would have said we didn't start the fire.
Maybe.
Because I've heard a lot of people saying it's not their fault.
It's not my fault. Yeah.
Now, if the informal business had a host, a award ceremony, and the best governance practices got a trophy, what would that trophy look like?
The informal economy.
Yes. The informal business economy. What would that trophy look like?
What would that trophy look like?
Would it be a crown? Would it be a clipboard?
If it was the formal economy, I would have said it would be a red pen with a big star on top, because we like our tick boxes. In the informal economy, I think it would be a shooting star. It's a wish.
A wish.
A wish, a shooting star.
Okay, that's actually very interesting. Let's say the informal economy got to the point where the government started subsidizing them. In other words, the government recognized the importance. Do you think that a limited version of corporate governance would help or hurt the informal sector?
I definitely think it would help. especially if government start funding, you immediately work with public funds. And then the accountability towards your taxpayers becomes a significant issue to address. So the moment that government starts funding the informal, subsidizing or funding or providing funding, you will have to have some sort of governance structure in place. Even if it is just to make sure everything is above board, the policies are compliant with, and that you can be accountable towards your stakeholders.
Thank you very much for your time, Doc. I appreciate it a lot. I know you are extremely busy with everything going on. I hope that we can maybe have a longer conversation down the line regarding corporate governance or regarding reporting.
Start your morning with insights and drive.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share this with friends and family, and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Boardrooms to breakthroughs, we cover it all. Of FS Business School, standing